The summer air in Alexandria still clung to the smell of fireworks smoke when Megan Hartley vanished just a few blocks from the Potomac River shoreline. The night of July 4th that year arrived with the roaring booms of fireworks, red and blue lights sweeping across the rows of old brick houses like hasty brushstrokes. At 10 p.m., the hotel security guard where Megan worked the night shift waved goodbye as the 22-year-old girl stepped down the front stairs, holding her familiar small handbag. He watched Megan's figure blend into the thinning crowd after the festival. Her thin dark blue jacket, the last splash of color before she turned into the dark alley behind King Street. What happened in the brief minutes that followed would haunt Alexandria for the next 3 decades. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. The summer evening of 1991 in Alexandria passed with an atmosphere heavy with the lingering smell of fireworks smoke on every street corner, as if the whole city hadn't yet let go of the Independence Day festival, but had only temporarily folded it away in the humid heat, still trapped on the pavement. The wind blowing in from the Potomac River carried the fading cheers of the crowd, mixed with the intermittent sounds of tour boats returning to the dock, and it all blended together, echoing off the red brick faces of the old house rows in Old Town and forming a hazy layer of sound, like a prolonged whisper in the night. Amid that chaotic rhythm, the hotel where Megan Hartley worked still had its lights on. The small brass sign, reflecting the pale yellow glow from the street lamp outside, and inside, the wall clock had just chimed to signal the end of the late shift. Megan, 22 years old, stepped out from behind the front desk, throwing on a thin jacket because the nighttime temperature was starting to drop, her hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, swaying lightly with each step. She said goodbye to her colleagues, grabbed her handbag, and headed out the door in the manner of someone all too familiar with this routine, completely unaware that those small movements would become the last images anyone ever saw of her. The hotel security guard leaned against the doorframe, recalling the moment Megan gave a polite smile before turning onto the street that was gradually emptying of people. The pavement still had long streaks of water reflecting the lights, stretching into blurred bands of color, where the spots from fireworks that had fallen earlier in the evening still left mottled marks. The smell of street food from the festival, the smell of alcohol from the bars, and the damp metallic scent from air conditioning pipes all mixed together, creating an atmosphere that was both lively and hazy, as if the entire neighborhood was still holding on to the breath of the past in every dark corner. A witness standing at the corner of King Street said he saw Megan turn into the stretch of road that was darker than usual. Where most shops had closed, their signs turned off, making the street shrink back into the flickering yellow of the few still working street lamps. He remembered the steady hum of the compressor from an old bar, the sounds of late-night activity, but mixed in was a strange silence when Megan stepped into that shadowy area. Deeper in the alley, a woman collecting trash recalled hearing a sound like someone saying a short phrase, unclear if it was a call or a response, then suddenly going quiet. But the hazy smoke from the fireworks at that moment, combined with a group of people passing by, prevented her from seeing anyone clearly. After that vague moment, the noises of the summer night continued as usual. The clinking of bottles in the bar, the light tap of shoes on the brick pavement, the sound of cars passing nearby. But Megan herself never appeared on the other side of the alley, as she should have. The route from the hotel to her apartment was only a few blocks away, a short distance that Megan had walked hundreds of times since moving to Virginia. Yet that night, it seemed that the very familiarity was what kept everyone from paying enough attention to know how far she had gone, or where she had stopped. As the night wore on, her roommate thought Megan had probably stayed over at a friend's after the festival. But by early morning, her bed was still untouched, blankets and pillows perfectly neat, and the room unusually quiet. There was no sound of a key turning in the lock, no message left, no sign that Megan had come home or tried to contact anyone. The family began to truly worry when both the landline phone and pager got no response from Megan at all. By then, all the harmless assumptions in their minds vanished, giving way to a sharp, cold sense of unease. They decided to call the police, reporting that Megan Hartley, the young woman they still thought was sleeping safely somewhere, had disappeared without a trace in the very city where she lived every day. The morning after Megan was reported missing, Alexandria police immediately returned to the route she usually walked from the hotel to her home, beginning an investigation phase that no one on the homicide team expected would stretch over more than 3 decades. King Street in the early morning still carried the remnants of the night's festivities. A few shops hadn't cleaned up yet, colored paper streamers scattered over sewer grates, the smell of alcohol lingering in the air, as if trying to cling to the pavement. The detectives started by establishing a starting point at the hotel door where Megan had stepped out the previous evening. From there, they followed the exact direction she had taken, crossing the rows of dappled streetlights, then moving toward the stretch of street that was normally bright but had been dimmer the night before due to some lights being out. Their footsteps echoed on the brick pavement, one by one, in complete contrast to the emptiness this stretch of road was now concealing. The alley where a witness had heard strange sounds became the first area to be cordoned off. As the crime scene technicians stretched the yellow tape, initial details emerged more clearly in daylight. The pavement showed faint drag marks, as if someone had slipped or been pulled in the night. Trash was disturbed in an unusual way, a plastic bag with unopened food scattered about, and a dumpster that always stood straight against the wall was now tilted out toward the middle of the walkway. All of it was small signals, nothing conclusive but too unusual to dismiss as coincidence. One of the detectives knelt near those drag marks, using a ruler to measure length and direction of pull, but the ground, compacted and damp from light rain overnight, made the traces hard to distinguish. Anything that might have been a shoe print, drag mark, or hand brace had already faded with time. Still, police understood this was the last place Megan might have set foot, and every detail here held potential value for them, however minor. While the tech team worked to document the scene, another group quickly took statements from 6 people who had passed through the area around the time Megan vanished. Those statements were fragmented, vague, and heavily affected by the fireworks noise, car sounds, music, and the chaos of the evening before. Yet police had to mine every word because they were all they had at that moment. 2 people said they heard hurried footsteps, as if someone was running or trying to catch up to another person. Another described hearing a sound like an argument, lasting only 1 to 2 seconds before cutting off, not long enough to recognize a voice or content, just enough to suggest some kind of conflict. One more witness, on his way home from a bar, insisted he had seen the silhouettes of 2 people standing close together in the alley. But when pressed for details, he wasn't sure if they were talking, arguing, or simply happened to be near each other. He only remembered their shadows stretched out by the weak streetlight and the lingering fireworks smoke in the air. Those statements shared one thing in common. No one saw faces clearly. No one could say for sure they had seen Megan, and no one felt confident describing the other person. Yet that very fragmentation painted a troubling picture. It appeared some kind of interaction had taken place, and it was anything but normal. After finishing the initial round of interviews, the investigation team moved on to collecting footage from nearby businesses. In 1991, most security cameras still used VHS tapes, with low quality and poor resistance to interference. Every time fireworks lit up the sky, frames would flare, becoming almost useless. Some cameras even showed full-screen static at the exact time Megan passed by, creating horizontal streaks that tore through the image. One camera at the corner bar captured only a quick-moving figure, but couldn't distinguish gender or clothing. Another at a convenience store kept cutting out between frames, leaving just scattered seconds of video. Police collected everything anyway, but in their hearts they all knew. The hope of clearly seeing Megan on those crude, low-quality tapes was virtually zero. Still, the number of cameras affected by interference and the timing of their coincidental failures made the detectives unable to brush it off. That night held too many things that were hard to explain. Looking at the scene overall, the faint drag marks, disturbed trash, statements about running footsteps and arguing, the silhouettes of 2 people, and an entire camera system suddenly rendered useless. The detectives understood that what they were facing was not a case of someone staying out overnight or a simple misunderstanding. There was no sign Megan had ever left the city voluntarily, nor any belongings suggesting she planned to go far. Everything added up to one shared conclusion the investigation team had to accept, even without direct evidence. This was not a voluntary disappearance. Megan had met with foul play, and it happened right on the very route she took home every night. When the detectives brought back all the VHS tapes collected from 3 businesses around King Street to the tech room, they didn't expect much. Security footage from 1991 was never sharp to begin with, and after a humid night with fireworks, smoke mixing with moisture clinging to the lenses, the quality was bound to be even worse. Still, this was all they had, so every frame, every segment, even a single second of clarity, was watched over and over with absolute focus. The first tape, taken from the small grocery store directly across from the alley Megan was believed to have entered, was the one viewed first. The black and white screen flickered slightly as the tape started rolling. Then thick layers of bright static appeared, like someone moving a flashlight in front of the lens. The technicians explained that this could be from fireworks light reflecting off the glass sign, causing the camera to misadjust exposure. Through those bursts of static, the only image that emerged clearly was the silhouette of a woman, most likely Megan, stepping into the dark part of the alley. If paused at the exact frame, one could see a slender figure, a slightly leaning posture while walking, and long hair tied low, matching the security guard's description. But after those 3 seconds, the image was swallowed again by thick streaks of light like fog, rendering the rest completely useless. There was no sight of her exiting the alley, nor anyone else entering. That was what made the first tape both valuable and helpless. It captured the moment Megan disappeared into the shadows, but revealed nothing about what happened next. The second tape belonged to the bar about 3 doors down from the alley, with the camera mounted high right above the entrance. Though the quality was slightly better, the angle was limited by the awning out front. Part of the pavement was obscured by the large metal roof, creating a natural blind spot right where Megan was believed to have passed. When the tape reached the approximate time of her disappearance, a figure appeared at the edge of the frame. This silhouette moved slowly, steadily, and only the blurry legs and a fleeting glimpse of the upper body were visible. The height relative to the pavement suggested an adult, most likely male, but poor contrast made it impossible to determine anything more. He or they moved in the same direction Megan had gone, not hurried, not rushed, but the timing between the 2 figures on different cameras led police to infer this could be the second silhouette witnesses had mentioned. One of the detectives paused the tape at various frames, trying to zoom in to identify any detail. Clothing color, pants style, gait. But every effort was defeated by the tape's quality. Pixels seemed to fall apart when enlarged. Still, what caught the detective's attention was the way that figure moved. Not wandering, not coincidental, but appearing to maintain a fixed distance behind where Megan was last seen. It felt like following, but there was nothing yet to conclude. By the third tape from the video rental store near the intersection with Queen Street, the frustration grew. This tape was almost useless. It glitched out for more than 4 minutes right during the most critical time. When the technicians rewound, they saw the segment before the dropout showed a few pedestrians crossing the street, the light of a passing car. Then suddenly everything dissolved into prolonged black static. A few minutes later, the picture returned to normal. The store owner said their camera often froze when area voltage dropped, something that happened frequently during big festival nights. Yet the fact that the camera failed exactly when Megan vanished could not be ignored. The missing footage meant a vehicle could have stopped, someone could have been pulled away, or some significant event could have occurred unseen. 3 tapes, each with its own issue. One full of static, one obstructed, one completely dropped out. But when pieced together, they formed a conclusion more frightening than anything the police wanted to admit. Megan was not walking alone on that stretch. Someone was nearby. Someone was walking behind her. And there was a strong possibility that person approached Megan during the time the video store camera was out. But even though the 3 VHS tapes suggested the presence of a second silhouette, they provided no detail that could be considered legal evidence. No clear face, no identifiable clothing, no license plate, no visible criminal act, no accompanying physical evidence. The scene had no body, no abandoned personal items, no obvious signs of assault. Everything remained just a series of blurry shadows, unprovable guesses. However, for the investigation team, those scattered silhouettes were enough to plant the first real suspicion. Someone had followed Megan, and that person appeared in no witness statements. A person no one knew, no one remembered, and who left no trace beyond a silent shadow drifting across the screen. Megan had not been alone on King Street that night, and that was the starting point for everything that would drag on for 33 years after. After reviewing all the VHS tapes and realizing the severe limitations of what they captured, the investigation team returned to the temporary meeting room set up right in the Alexandria police station to reconstruct Megan's final journey, minute by minute wherever possible. Building a timeline is a mandatory step in every missing persons case, especially those with no body, no definitive witness statements, and camera footage that only provides scattered fragments. In Megan's case, the timeline was even more crucial, because every clue the police had at that point was pointing to the same conclusion. Something happened during the period the cameras failed to record. They started from the starting point, the hotel door. Here, the time Megan left her shift was determined based on the front desk clock and the security guard's account, two sources that aligned relatively well. No one knew the exact second she turned onto King Street, but they knew that just a few minutes after leaving the door, Megan appeared in the fleeting frame of the grocery store camera. Those 3 seconds of footage, when compared to the hotel door location, allowed the detectives to estimate her speed and direction of movement. From that, they calculated the time it took Megan to reach the alley, not long, but completely consistent with her usual walking habits. From here, the timing was pinned to the only remaining marker, not camera footage, but the account of the witness standing nearby. That man reported seeing Megan just outside the streetlight area, but due to poor visibility, he couldn't identify her clearly. This statement matched the position of the first camera from the moment the light static hit until Megan vanished into the shadows. It was only a few steps. The investigation team marked this point on the timeline, but immediately realized that from here onward, everything turned into a long stretch of haze. When the timeline was laid out straight on the board, the segments with information stood out like steady pulses of light. The moment Megan left the hotel, the instant she turned onto King Street, the time she entered the grocery store camera frame, and shortly after, the moment the bar camera captured the second silhouette. But between those two verifiable segments was a gap stretching nearly 9 minutes, a complete absence of images, sounds, or any physical evidence. That very gap became the knot the entire investigation team couldn't explain right away. In a populated city like Alexandria, with main streets always having traffic, the fact that no one saw Megan for nearly 10 minutes was strange. But it grew even stranger when checking the map of the streetlight and camera system at that time. The exact area Megan was believed to have walked through the stretch between the two cameras fell right within the blind spot of both the lighting and security systems. The city power department had previously logged electrical faults at one of the nearby poles, issues that occurred multiple times in the week before the festival but hadn't been fully fixed. On festival night, the surge in power consumption caused many lights to operate unstably. These details, seemingly minor and purely technical, turned out to be the key to understanding why the area Megan entered was unusually dark compared to the rest of the street. The more they studied the map, the more uneasy the investigation team became. That power outage directly attacked the most critical part of any disappearance, the last sighting. It prevented police from determining which way Megan continued, from knowing if anyone approached her, and from confirming whether she left the area on foot or was forced into a vehicle. And worse, right within that faulty lighting zone was a section not covered by any camera. A stretch about several dozen meters long, just enough for someone to be approached and subdued without being seen. When the timeline was completed, the detectives looked at the board and saw only a chain of data points, stripped of nearly all meaning by the empty segment, right in the middle. It was like a film reel with the most important part torn out, leaving only the opening and closing while the entire plot in between vanished completely. The more they analyzed, the more they realized that if anything happened to Megan, it almost certainly occurred during that window. 9 minutes. 9 minutes when no one saw anything. No one heard anything clearly. No camera recorded anything. Just vague witness memories, flickering shadows on VHS tapes, and an alley without enough light. And those 9 minutes, later on, became the seed for a blind spot that would persist for many years. In the end-of-day briefing, An older detective looked at the timeline board and said slowly, more to himself than as a statement, "If we can't fill this gap, the case will die right here." No one disagreed, because they all understood that those 9 minutes felt like a void in the middle of the city, a darkness where no one heard a cry for help, no one saw anything unusual, and no evidence revealed what happened to Megan Hartley before she vanished from Alexandria that night. That afternoon, when police returned to the hotel where Megan worked to take detailed statements from the last people who had contact with her, the atmosphere at the front desk seemed to still maintain its usual daily rhythm, but beneath that surface was a quiet tension that any disappearance inevitably brings. Megan's shift coworker, a young woman named Valerie, came out from the employee break room, her hair messy from a sleepless night. She sat down in the small meeting room of the hotel and tried to answer the detective's questions calmly. Valerie confirmed that Megan showed no unusual behavior throughout the night shift. No strange calls, no one came looking for her, no arguments or conflicts. She was normal. A little tired because the festival brought a lot of guests, but nothing out of the ordinary, Valerie said, her hands twisting the hem of her shirt as if trying to hold on to something. Still, when pressed further, she admitted that Megan seemed a bit hurried when packing up to leave, as if she wanted to get out of the hotel sooner than usual, but it was just a feeling, not strong enough to count as a sign. One detective noted that response, but couldn't draw any conclusion from such a vague impression. If Megan was worried about something, she hadn't said a word to anyone at work. This left police both relieved because there was no sign of internal conflict, and worried because it suggested Megan might have encountered danger from outside her familiar circle. After Valerie, the next person questioned was the night security guard, the one who had watched Megan leave the hotel the night before. He sat up straight, hands clasped together, his eyes still heavy with the feeling that he couldn't prevent something terrible from happening. When asked about the moment Megan left, he confirmed exactly what he had already said. She stepped out, smiled, adjusted her handbag strap, then turned onto King Street. But what drew the police's attention more wasn't in that recounting, it was in the offhand comment he made afterward. The lobby camera was glitching all evening. That casual remark made everyone in the room go silent for a few seconds. When asked for details, he explained that throughout his shift the night before, the hotel's internal camera system, which was already old and unreliable, kept flickering on and off. Sometimes the screen would show horizontal lines. Sometimes the signal would drop completely, then come back. No one paid attention because on festival night, power voltage in the whole area always fluctuated. But any camera malfunction occurring at the exact time of a disappearance instantly became suspicious. "I remember when she walked through the lobby, the monitor went dark for a beat," he said, his voice trailing off as if suddenly realizing that detail might matter more than he thought. Police noted it down and marked it on the timeline as a secondary detail worth revisiting later. Finally, police decided to question staff at the bar across the street, which stayed open all night and was a popular gathering spot after big city events. The one answering questions was a male bartender, his face etched with exhaustion from the long night, but his eyes lighting up when he heard Megan's name mentioned. He confirmed he hadn't seen Megan come into the bar, but he remembered something else. There was a guy standing on the sidewalk outside her hotel. "I noticed because he was there for a really long time, not smoking, not drinking anything, not talking to anyone." Police immediately asked for details, but the bartender could only recall general features. Tall build, wearing a dark jacket, hat pulled low. More notably, he said the man seemed focused on staring at the hotel door, the exact spot Megan walked out of not long after. When asked if the man approached anyone else or did anything stand out, the bartender shook his head, but he insisted the stranger's presence made him pay attention for several minutes, to the point he even turned to the window to see if the guy would come into the bar. This created an overlap between the bartender's statement and the footage from the second camera where the silhouette moving behind Megan appeared. Though it couldn't yet be considered a match, it was clearly the first time a clue about the possibility of Megan being followed had been raised in a clear and consistent way. The detective noted, "Man loitering, observing hotel door, no interaction with anyone." Those cold notes seemed like the first pieces of a picture that hadn't yet taken shape. And even though none of the witnesses knew anything about each other, every statement they gave pointed to the same underlying thread. Megan wasn't the only one walking on King Street that night. Someone else was standing watching, someone else was moving behind her, and someone else might have had their eyes on her before she vanished. But, just like the hotel's flickering camera, everything police had at that moment was only signals, not evidence. Who was that man? Did he follow Megan? Did he appear on any camera frame? No one knew. But with 3 statements unintentionally aligning in the same direction, police understood they had just touched the first clue, with real potential to lead them the right way, even if it was a direction full of shadows and with no guarantees. The picture was starting to change, but the outlines were still so blurry they couldn't yet name it. Only one thing was clear. Megan didn't vanish into thin air. Someone had been watching her, and he might have followed her on the night of July 4th, 1991. The vague statements about the sound of a car door slamming shut, the figure loitering outside the hotel, and the 9-minute gap in the timeline led the investigation team to lean toward the possibility that Megan wasn't simply approached on the street but might have been forced into a vehicle. This wasn't a firm conclusion, but on a night crowded with people, noise, and chaos, someone being pulled into a car could happen in just seconds without anyone noticing, especially since 2 witnesses both described hearing a loud thud right at the moment the camera glitched out. Based on those scattered bits of information, police decided they had to examine all traffic activity in the King Street area during the time Megan vanished, even though they knew it would be extremely complicated because in 1991, everything had to be done manually. There was no automatic OCR, no high-quality traffic cameras, and most parking lots, garages, and roadways didn't keep systematic vehicle logs like in modern times. Still, it was the only investigative direction that seemed capable of opening any kind of door. They started by mapping out every street intersecting King Street within 1 block of where Megan was last seen. Officers were assigned to each intersection, noting every license plate that store cameras, bar cameras, or patrol officers could capture in that time frame. More than 30 vehicles were recorded in the 15-minute window, including residents' cars, visitor vehicles, taxis, delivery trucks, and a few illegally parked ones. None of them, at least initially, had any direct connection to Megan, but the important thing was that police had to cross-check each one. The clear plates were verified first. Many belonged to local residents, some to bar and restaurant patrons, the rest to delivery services. All had their alibis confirmed. But one detail in that pile of plate notes made the lead detective pause. A license plate recorded as unreadable. In reality, it wasn't captured by camera, but handwritten in a notebook by a convenience store employee, because he noticed the silver sedan parked right in front of the store, flash its headlights, and then pull away exactly when Megan was believed to have passed through the area. He couldn't remember the full sequence of numbers, only that the plate was white, the common type in Virginia, and that the numbers were dirty or scratched, making them impossible to read clearly. The employee even apologized for thinking his note was too sloppy, but for police, it was one of the rare fragments linked to a vehicle showing unusual behavior. No one could confirm that silver car was involved, but the fact it started up and left at the critical moment made every detective flag it. But now they faced an unavoidable problem. In 1991, there was no citywide traffic camera system capturing clear plates. Image analysis was almost useless, all too blurry to extract any plate. So they turned to the most manual option, filtering every silver car owned by residents in the surrounding area. Alexandria at that time had thousands of vehicles registered in Old Town and nearby. To avoid pointless checks, police narrowed the search to those recorded as parked or moving during the hours Megan disappeared. After sifting, they ended up with a list of about 18 silver sedans that could potentially match all common makes like Ford, Toyota, Chevrolet, and Buick. The list was divided among teams to start checking each owner. Out of the 18, some owners verified their location that night. Others had evidence from friends or different store cameras, but 2 on the list couldn't be immediately confirmed. One belonged to someone who had left the state the previous year. The registration still hadn't been transferred. The other belonged to a man named Thomas Hale in Arlington, but police couldn't find specific information about the car's location during the festival night because he lived alone, worked flexible hours, and had no witnesses. At that point, the name Hale was just one of dozens on the checklist. No one on the investigation team saw him as particularly noteworthy. They didn't know that later he would become the central figure. But even at this stage, that blurry plate, something considered too useless to hold value, was quietly starting to create a small trail in the case file. It forced police to keep combing through every silver car, every owner passing King Street, every fuzzy or unclear plate. And that was what kept Megan's case from being closed too soon. A plate no one could read, scribbled by hand in an old store employee's notebook, had become one of the tiniest but most persistent clues. Though at this moment police couldn't confirm anything, no vehicle description, no physical evidence, no concrete proof, they still sensed that silver car might not have been coincidental. Everything about the night Megan vanished fell into that technical blind spot. Cameras full of static, flickering streetlights, witnesses with unclear memories, and a silver car with a blurry plate. It all blended into a thick fog covering the truth. Police didn't yet know that fog would follow the case for the next 3 decades, but they already knew one thing from day one. If Megan was taken away in a vehicle, then that car, blurry plate or not, was the single most important piece they could hold on to. And they couldn't let it disappear from the file. Just like the way Megan had disappeared from Alexandria on the night of July 4th, 1991. After completing the initial sweep of vehicles moving near the area where Megan vanished, police realized they needed more than data from cameras and license plate lists. In a case with no body, no abandoned items, no strong physical traces, witnesses were the rare light source they could rely on to illuminate the dark corners of the night of July 4th, 1991. So the investigation team decided to expand the interview scope, this time in the most thorough and manual way possible, knocking on every door in the area Megan passed through when she disappeared. This block was part of Alexandria's long-established residential neighborhood, with old brick houses, small green yards, and white wooden fences still scattered with pine needles from the festival. The morning the investigation team started work, the street was still quiet. Only a few people watering plants or walking dogs, but the first knocks on residents' doors immediately sparked a spreading unease from one house to the next. Within the first few hours, police split into 4 small teams, each handling a cluster of homes. A total of 42 households were selected based on geographic location and the likelihood they could have heard or seen something the night before. Each team followed its own route, noting every statement collected, no matter how vague or seemingly unimportant. Most residents reacted with shock when Megan's name was mentioned. Many said they weren't home on festival night, or heard nothing beyond the fireworks. But among dozens of generic responses, 2 statements made detectives pause their pens and underline immediately. The first came from a middle-aged woman, living in a house just one corner away from the alley Megan passed through. When asked if she heard or saw anything unusual on festival night, she initially shook her head. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, hesitantly said that around the time she was about to close her window, she heard a strong thud from the street direction. That sound blended into the fireworks exploding over the river, so she didn't pay attention at the moment. But when police mentioned Megan, she thought it might have been a car door slamming shut. She described the sound as short, sharp, metallic, not like trash being dumped or something falling. More importantly, it rang out right as a big burst of fireworks went off simultaneously, meaning if this was truly a forced abduction into a vehicle, that sound could easily have been drowned out by the festival noise and gone unnoticed by anyone else. The detectives immediately noted the exact location from which she heard the sound, then marked it on Megan's route map. That spot fell within the faulty streetlight zone the area cameras couldn't observe, matching the 9-minute gap in the timeline. The second statement came from an elderly man living across from a small parking lot about half a block from where Megan was last seen. He said that night, while stepping outside to pick up a newspaper blown off course by the wind, he noticed a silver car parked incorrectly. It wasn't within the lines but angled out onto the curb, almost blocking the walkway. That was what caught his attention. Because the neighborhood had always been known for being orderly, with few people parking carelessly. When police pressed for more, He tried to recall but could only describe the car very generally. Silver color, sedan body, the roof reflecting streetlight, as if the car had recently been washed or driven. He couldn't remember the license plate, partly because it was dark, partly because light from the main road was dim due to the faulty street lamp. He also didn't see anyone clearly inside. If someone was in the car, they stayed completely silent. More notably, he said the car wasn't parked there long. When he went back inside for less than 2 minutes to grab a jacket, by the time he returned to the door, the car was gone. That moment happened just before or right around the time Megan was believed to have entered the no-camera zone. These two statements, separate in location but overlapping in their sense of something unusual, formed small but important pieces for the investigation team. A metallic thud echoing amid the fireworks. A silver sedan parked improperly, there one moment and gone the next, and both fell within the blind spot range. No cameras, weak lighting, few witnesses. When asked further about the license plate details, the elderly man just shook his head. Couldn't see anything clearly. It was like the darkness swallowed it. A simple remark, but it perfectly reflected the state of the case. Everything seemed covered by the darkness of that festival night. From the plate, to the stranger's face, to Megan's final minutes. Still, police couldn't rely entirely on intuition. They immediately marked the location of the car the man described and cross-referenced it with the spot where the woman heard the slamming door. The result? The two locations were less than 30 meters apart, both on the stretch no camera recorded. That very overlap made the detectives start suspecting the alley Megan turned into wasn't just where she was approached, it might have been where the suspicious vehicle stopped. Yet when cross-checking against the license plate list the team had gathered during the vehicle sweep, no plate fully matched the man's description. There was only the one recorded as unreadable, a vague piece of information, but one that uncomfortably aligned with the statement about the improperly parked silver car. No one could confirm they were describing the same vehicle, but the fact that two different witnesses reported unusual things overlapping in the same area meant the investigation team couldn't dismiss it. After fully recording all statements from the 42 households, the detectives returned to the command room with pages upon pages of notes, most leading nowhere, but those tiny details, when placed side by side, began forming a new shape to the story. Not clear, not certain, but enough to know Megan hadn't been walking in complete emptiness. There was a car, there was a slamming door sound, there was a silver sedan that appeared and vanished. Though still too blurry to conclude anything, police understood those statements were confirmation of the hypothesis they'd considered from the early stages. Megan was most likely approached using a vehicle, and that vehicle was the key to the night of July 4th, 1991, even though they still couldn't know where it led. As the statements from residents around King Street were compiled and added to the file, the investigation team began entering the phase that every missing persons case must face, examining those with close personal ties to the victim. And it was during the process of screening the relationships around Megan that one name emerged, not because of physical evidence, not because of direct testimony, but because of an incident that had happened a few weeks before she vanished. Right on the morning of the Tuesday after Megan disappeared, Valerie, Megan's coworker, mentioned a detail she thought might not be important, but didn't want to hide. Megan had once had a tense argument with a male colleague at the hotel named Andrew Pike. That argument didn't happen on festival night, but it was loud enough to draw attention at the front desk the week before. According to Valerie, Megan seemed very upset after that conversation. Police immediately considered Andrew someone who needed to be questioned, even though they knew many workplace conflicts are completely harmless and unrelated to crime. But in a case with so few leads, every detail had to be thoroughly checked to avoid missing something critical. Andrew was invited to the Alexandria police station that same afternoon. He was a young man in his mid-20s, slender build, lightly curly brown hair, and wearing glasses. When he entered the interview room, he appeared nervous but cooperative. The detective asked him about his relationship with Megan, about the prior argument, and about his whereabouts the night Megan vanished. Andrew admitted they had argued, but insisted the reason was very simple. He and Megan disagreed about scheduling shifts for the weekend. He said the argument lasted less than 5 minutes and had nothing to do with anything personal. We just argued about work hours. Nothing more, he said, his hands clenching slightly from nerves. However, that nervousness is common in people unaccustomed to dealing with police, so the detectives didn't jump to any conclusions. When asked about the evening Megan disappeared, Andrew provided a clear alibi. He was at his sister's house in Fairfax for a dinner celebrating his nephew's birthday. Very quickly, police verified this. His sister confirmed it, and even provided a photo showing Andrew at the party around 8:45 p.m., a time that perfectly overlapped with when Megan was last seen on King Street. Even the sister's neighbors confirmed they saw Andrew's car parked out front all evening. There was no indication he left Fairfax during the suspicious window. In theory, he couldn't have been in Alexandria at the exact moment Megan vanished. Even driving the shortest route, the nearly 15-mile distance between the two places couldn't be covered fast enough for him to be on King Street at that time. After checking every detail in his statement, police cleared Andrew from direct suspicion. But since the case was still in its early stage, they kept his name on a temporary watch list, just in case some unusual coincidence arose. Still, the detectives all understood that Andrew was not the answer to the disappearance. They reviewed the hotel cameras again despite the glitches, but no footage showed Andrew at the hotel that night. Other colleagues also confirmed Andrew didn't argue with Megan on the day she vanished. All evidence pointed to him having no involvement. Yet pursuing Andrew wasn't entirely useless. In many missing persons cases, the first wrong lead is important because it helps police eliminate distracting theories, especially those involving personal conflicts, which can easily become launching pads for mistaken assumptions. But in this instance, police had unintentionally wasted unnecessary time. When the internal report was updated, one detective wrote clearly, "Andrew Pike lead unrelated. Minor argument, solid alibi." A brief note, but it marked the end of a branch that once seemed promising. However, what made the detectives feel both relieved and impatient was that the case hadn't advanced at all after clearing Andrew. No clear motive from friends or colleagues. No personal conflict leading to violence. No one with emotional or financial reasons to harm Megan. Meanwhile, the other pieces of information, the car door sound, the improperly parked silver sedan, the blurry plate, remained hard to verify. Clearing Andrew from suspicion had essentially brought police back to square one, with only one main hypothesis left. Megan didn't disappear because of someone she knew. This made them have to more seriously consider the possibility that Megan was approached by a complete stranger. But that direction was far harder to investigate, because it didn't start with motive or relationship. It started with hunting an unknown person in the shadows, a direction no one wanted, but the only one remaining after the first suspect was ruled out. And that was the false turning point of the early investigation days. They had spent 2 days chasing a completely unrelated lead, only to realize the person who made Megan vanish wasn't anyone she knew. The case didn't move forward, but it turned to face a more uncomfortable truth. Megan wasn't harmed by someone familiar, but approached by a stranger, someone who followed her on King Street, and not a single witness had yet seen his face. 3 months after Megan Hartley vanished from King Street, the case file began taking on the familiar shape of disappearances that leave no trace. Growing thinner in new information day by day, but thicker with pages of notes reading unable to verify. Insufficient data, no match, unrelated. Everything the Alexandria police had tried to build in the first weeks, the timeline, camera analysis, resident interviews, license plate sweeps, seemed to lead to the same numb and helpless conclusion. All clues stopped at the level of possible, speculation, suggestion, never crossing the threshold into evidence. And without evidence, every investigative effort began to slow in a painful way. The cameras from the 3 businesses around the scene were almost useless after being reviewed dozens of times. Noisy frames, blurry silhouettes, and the 4-minute dropout on the video store camera remained the biggest void, swallowing the entire sequence of events that night. No one knew what happened in those 4 minutes, but police also couldn't create anything new from the blind spots permanently fixed on the VHS tapes. The image analysis technicians had tried every method available in 1991, adjusting brightness, boosting contrast, filtering noise, projecting each frame on specialized equipment. But the results never changed. They only saw Megan step into the darkness and disappear. No frame showed her walking out. No vehicle appeared clearly. No face, no hand reaching, no figure approaching. Just thick black areas mixed with fireworks lights streaked across the lens. Physical traces were virtually non-existent. The faint drag marks on the pavement, the tilted dumpster, the disturbed plastic bag, all documented but legally worthless because no connection could be proven. No hair strands, no blood, no discarded clothing, no personal items belonging to Megan dropped behind. Nothing of hers turned up within many blocks of the area. This forced police to painfully admit that if Megan had been pulled into a vehicle, the perpetrator acted too quickly, too cleanly, and too carefully to leave any remnants. The only thing police had, a handwritten note of a plate unreadable, led nowhere. The sweeps of silver car owners in the area brought back plenty of data, but didn't bring them any closer to a suspect. Owners with alibis, vehicles not matching the timing, vague descriptions all made the suspect list longer, but not deeper. After 3 months, only 2 names remained, not fully verified, but there was no evidence they had deviated from their normal routines either. Repeated interviews yielded no new information. No additional witnesses emerged. No one found anything resembling Megan's belongings. No medical facility admitted an unidentified young woman that night. No reports of a body matching Megan's description throughout the summer and fall of 1991. She had been erased from the city map. A complete disappearance, no cry for help, no certain witness, no physical evidence, was the hardest scenario for any investigation unit. In the internal meeting, at the end of the 3rd month, the lead detective didn't want to say what everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to admit. The case was stalling. They needed something, anything but for weeks. The file hadn't gained even one valuable line. A younger investigator, who had watched the VHS tapes until he knew every second by heart, wrote in his report, "No new data. Tapes cannot be further exploited. Traces insufficient for analysis. No additional witnesses." Meanwhile, the initial statements gradually faded over time. Everyone remembered the festival night as crowded, noisy, chaotic. But the more they were re-asked, the more witnesses' memories became confused. One who had firmly said he heard arguing now said he wasn't sure. One who mentioned seeing a silver car wasn't sure anymore if it was parked exactly where he first described. One who recalled a strong car door slam later described it as sounding like trash being dumped. Human memory began to crack, drift, distort with time, and police couldn't rely on something so fragile. And when every investigative direction led nowhere, when reports started looking the same, when meetings grew shorter, Megan's case gradually approached the fork the detectives always tried to avoid, transferring the file to special status. Early in the 4th month, the official document was signed. Megan Hartley's disappearance was classified as missing person suspicious circumstances. This wasn't closing the file, wasn't giving up, but it was a step acknowledging that the case was no longer progressing through active investigation. It would still be monitored, still kept in the system, still assigned to someone, but no longer pursued full-time with the intensity of the first weeks. In short, the case remained open, but no longer hot. For Megan's family, those administrative words were a cold cut. Their daughter was missing and under suspicious circumstances, but no one knew what was really happening, and nothing pointed definitively in any direction. For police, it was a reluctant admission. They had done everything possible under the conditions of 1991. But no body, no physical evidence, no clear cameras, no certain witnesses, no plate, no traces. Megan Hartley, 22 years old, vanished into a blind spot, and that very blind spot was now swallowing the entire case. When the calendar turned to 1993, nearly 2 years since the night Megan vanished, her case file sat on the lead detective's desk like a persistent reminder of an unsolved mystery in the heart of Alexandria. Throughout those nearly 2 years, there were no new discoveries, no reports of unidentified bodies matching Megan's description, and no calls from people claiming to have witnessed anything new from the festival night in 1991. The case, once a priority for the entire investigation unit in the first 3 months, had become a thick but silent stack of papers, no longer opened daily. The folded corners on notes, the red pen lines marking key points, the timeline diagrams once crowded with arrows on the meeting room whiteboard had long been erased to make way for newer, hotter cases demanding faster responses. And in that heavy, stalled state, Megan Hartley's file was transferred to the cold case unit, the division specializing in cases that weren't progressing but couldn't be closed. This decision didn't mean abandonment. It was a necessary reorganization in a police force with limited resources. But for the detectives who had worked Megan's case from the very first days, the handover carried a sense of failure no one wanted to voice. They had done everything possible, combed through blurry VHS footage, knocked on more than 40 residents' doors, screened every silver car, examined every relationship in Megan's life, and checked every missing person or unidentified body report across the state. But everything circled back to square one. No Megan, no perpetrator, no evidence strong enough to name a suspect. That night had erased it all. A veteran detective, in his final report before handing over the file, wrote a short note. If Megan was taken into a vehicle, the perpetrator acted within 30 to 40 seconds and left no visible traces. The information gap leaves every hypothesis without support. Those words were like a quiet admission that the case had entered the phase where police could only hope for chance. Someone confessing out of guilt, hidden evidence suddenly emerging, an old statement re-examined from a new angle. But the longer they waited, the more absolute the silence became. Entering the second year, many initial witnesses had moved away. Some no longer clearly remembered details from the festival night, memories blending into countless similar events afterward. Those who remained, when re-interviewed, only repeated what they had said back in 1991. No more. No less. No changes. Those who thought they heard a strong car door slam now weren't sure if it was fireworks or trash falling. Those who remembered seeing a silhouette moving behind Megan could no longer confirm if it was male or female. Time didn't just fade memories. It diluted the meaning of every note in the file. No new discoveries from any agency. Volunteer search teams found nothing in wooded areas near the city. Hospital medical records showed no patients matching Megan's description in the weeks after. Calls about bodies drifting along the Potomac shore, or in Maryland woods, things that occasionally happened, were all checked but didn't match. Reports of disturbed ground near Fort Belvoir yielded nothing. Just soil churned from routine military activity. Everything returned to zero. For Megan's family, the case moving to the cold case unit felt like watching the only slightly open window of hope slam shut. They still called police every few months, asking if there was anything new, and the answer was always the same. We're still monitoring, but no additional data. A procedurally correct response but soulless. A repeated line sounding like the somber background music of every unsolved case. Meanwhile, the new detectives assigned to the cold case unit had to read the entire file from the beginning, each reaching the same conclusion. The case was frozen by the perpetrator's perfection that night. No physical clues, no signs of struggle, no clear tire tracks, no cameras, no identifications, no evidence. Megan resisted. One cold case detective wrote in his reassessment, "Random crime, low probability. Prepared crime, too flawless." Question: did perpetrator know the blind spots, or just opportunistically exploit them? But even writing that, he knew it was just speculation. Without evidence, no one knew if that night was planned or opportunistic. No one knew if the perpetrator lived locally or was just a stranger passing through. No one knew where the silver car, if truly involved, went, parked, or who drove it. 2 years passed, with no answers to any question. When Megan's file was placed in the cold case 1993 drawer in the Alexandria Police Department's archives, it became part of the long list of cases the city couldn't solve but couldn't forget either. The yellowing pages, the VHS tapes sealed in plastic bags, the folded route sketches all lay silent in the numbered box MH9107. On the outside of the box was only one brief, cold description. Missing person. Suspicious circumstances. No new leads. And that was when Megan Hartley's case officially entered the shadows. a darkness as deep and long as the uncaptured stretch of road that had swallowed her on the night of July 4, 1991. 10 years after Megan Hartley's file was placed in the Cold Case 1993 drawer, it lay silent in the archives of the Alexandria Police Department like a frozen piece of memory trapped in the past. By 2001, a young detective newly transferred to the Cold Case unit named Daniel Rourke was assigned the task of reviewing several long-dormant missing persons cases to assess the potential for reinvestigation based on the unit's new standards. No one expected much from this review. Most old files had been eroded by time, data degraded, witnesses scattered, evidence diminished in value. But when Daniel opened the box, MH9107, he quickly realized this was not an ordinary case. He read through every report page as if reviewing a torn manuscript. The timeline with its 9-minute gap, the 3 blurry VHS cameras, statements about a slamming car door, the silver sedan with no clear plate, and Megan's complete disappearance into a city blind spot. But what made him pause longer wasn't what had been investigated. It was a small detail overlooked among dozens of technical document pages. The report on checking the hotel cameras where Megan worked. The report clearly stated that the lobby camera had been glitching all through the night of July 4th, something the hotel security guard had repeated to police. This had been noted, but due to the technological limitations of 1991, investigators at the time assumed the malfunction stemmed only from unstable voltage on festival night. However, when Daniel closely examined the second copy of the report, a copy not included in the initial summary, but still in the file, he noticed a faint pencil note in the margin. Camera repair at 1740 Tech. T.H. He frowned, not because the notation immediately revealed anything, but because it didn't appear anywhere in the official file. To make sure he wasn't mistaken, he reviewed all notes related to the security cameras. Nowhere in the main reports was there any mention of the camera being serviced in the afternoon before Megan vanished. Why hadn't this been treated as a lead? Was it because police at the time thought the camera issue was just a technical glitch from the holiday? Or was the report incomplete? Or simply that they didn't see it as noteworthy? Daniel copied the initials T.H. into his notebook, then cross-checked the hotel's equipment maintenance records. Records from that era were mostly paper, not digitized, but fortunately, the hotel still kept copies of maintenance logs. He went to the current manager, requested the 1991 maintenance ledger. When the man brought out a thick, yellowed book, Daniel flipped through page by page until he found the entry for July 4th that year. Midway down the page, the line read, "Recheck CCTV system tech, T. Hale." That name made Daniel freeze for a few seconds. Thomas Hale, a name not unfamiliar in Megan's file, but buried under layers of other documents. One of the silver car owners who couldn't be verified during the 1991 sweep. At the time, the inability to prove Hale was in Alexandria when Megan disappeared led police to file him under insufficient data, then let him fade into obscurity as the case moved to cold case. But now, with this log entry, the coincidence became too significant to ignore. Hale was the person who serviced the camera at the hotel just hours before it started glitching right around the time Megan left. Daniel sat quietly for a long while, because what he had just read opened a major question the original file never answered. Why did a camera that had been functioning stably malfunction precisely on the night Megan vanished, and the last person to touch it was someone who had appeared on the list of unverified silver car owners? He reviewed the timeline again. Megan left the hotel around after 10 p.m. The camera began flickering sometime before 9 p.m. Right in the window, the maintenance log noted as when the system was adjusted. A camera failing after service isn't always suspicious. But when that failure aligns with a disappearance, and the technician was once on the unverified location list, it couldn't be mere coincidence. Daniel wrote in his internal report, "Camera malfunction. Unusually close to maintenance. Technician. Thomas Hale requires verification." Though there was no evidence yet that Hale was directly involved in Megan's disappearance, Daniel understood one thing clearly. If there was any detail worth reopening an investigative direction, this was it. Because from 1991 to 2001, every other lead had run dry. while this detail emerged like a small, unexpected stream flowing from the barren rock of the old file. A seemingly meaningless pencil note had become the first lead in 10 years, enough to make Daniel lean forward, focusing on the name T. Hale, as if it were the only point of light piercing through the darkness that had stretched since the day Megan Hartley vanished. As Daniel Rourke continued reviewing Megan Hartley's file after 10 years, he added more notes on the suspicious points related to the hotel camera being serviced just hours before Megan vanished. But right as he was trying to find more leads connected to Thomas Hale, an unexpected event occurred. An old witness walked into the Alexandria police station with a statement he said he should have given years ago. It was an elderly man named Gerald Whitmore, a longtime resident of the King Street area. His hair had gone mostly gray, his voice raspy from age and asthma, but his eyes remained strangely sharp as he said he had followed Megan's case for the entire decade. Gerald explained that on the night of July 4th, 1991, he had seen a silver sedan appear twice in a row during the fireworks display. The first time, he saw it parked improperly in front of a closed store. The second time, the part he had never told anyone, was when the car returned shortly after and stopped for 20 to 30 seconds before leaving again. When the investigation team in 1991 questioned him, he only mentioned a silver car parked wrong. But this time, he revealed that he believed he had seen the car come back, something he had kept silent about for personal reasons over the years. When Daniel asked why he hadn't said it back then, Gerald lowered his voice, leaning back in his chair as if afraid of his own memory. 10 years ago, I wasn't sure, and I didn't want anyone thinking I was the kind of person who sees crime everywhere. But now, I believe I have to speak up. Gerald described how the booming fireworks were rattling his windows that night. He went outside because his dog was barking nonstop. As he was heading back in, he saw the silver sedan driving very slowly through the intersection before stopping. The taillights glowed like someone was lightly tapping the brake. In those few dozen seconds, Gerald stared at it, unclear if from instinct or curiosity, but he didn't see the driver's face. Only the silhouette of a person in the front seat. Then the car drove off, blending into the traffic leaving the festival area. When he heard about Megan's disappearance the next day, he thought of that car. But because he wasn't sure of the exact timing, he didn't dare claim anything definitive. Daniel listened to the whole account without interrupting once. Though this statement came far too late, it created an intersection with what he had read. A 1991 witness describing a silver car parked improperly. Another hearing, a strong car door slam. And now Gerald saying the car returned a second time. Even if the information was too delayed to hold legal value, it strongly supported the hypothesis that the car didn't just appear once at the scene, it came back for some undetermined reason. Daniel asked specifically, "Do you remember the license plate, the body style, the make?" Gerald shook his head. He described dark red taillights, the body reflecting streetlights on the roof, but he couldn't be sure if it was a Ford Taurus, Chevrolet Cavalier, or Toyota Camry, the three common silver models of that era. All he remembered was the unusually clean silver color, like the car had just been washed or recently driven. Daniel noted in his report. Silver car appeared twice per witness. No plate recalled, no make identified, everything aligned with what the original file recorded. But as Gerald left the station, Daniel had to face the bitter truth. Too many years had passed to verify the statement further. Area cameras no longer retained 1991 tapes. Nearby parking lots had changed owners and no longer kept records from the previous decade. Most late 80s models, the ones likely matching Gerald's description, had by now been sold, scrapped, or moved to other states. There was no longer any way to trace the path of the silver sedan the witness said had returned. Daniel tried rechecking the list of silver car owners the original investigation had compiled in 1991, especially those whose alibis couldn't be verified at the time. When he pulled up the old records, the two names without confirmed alibis from back then, including Thomas Hale, reappeared. He flagged them again, but this time not out of direct suspicion, rather because they were data points never fully processed. However, a decade had gone by, making it nearly impossible to re-verify the locations of those two owners on festival night in 1991. One had moved out of state, the other no longer lived at the old address. Daniel clearly felt one thing. What Gerald said might be true, but the truth arriving too late meant it couldn't turn into evidence. That statement was like a key finally found for the lock, but the lock had rusted shut to the point it could no longer be opened. When he wrote in the summary report, witness statement 10 years late, unable to further verify. Statement supports silver car involvement hypothesis but creates no investigative progress. He himself felt the characteristic helplessness of cold case work. The truth sometimes arrives, but only after the door to the truth has long been closed. And just like previous reviews, Megan's file once again stood still with one more fitting piece of information added, but nothing that could move it forward even a single step. 20 years after the 2001 file review, technology had advanced to the point where things once considered permanently lost in the Megan Hartley case could be re-examined. In 2021, the Alexandria Cold Case Unit joined a new pilot program in the state of Virginia to apply artificial intelligence in recovering old image data, especially low-quality VHS tapes from the 80s and 90s. When the list of cases proposed for the program came up, the file MH9107, Megan Hartley, resurfaced. Not because of any new leads, but because this file contained exactly what the AI team was looking for. Blurry, noisy VHS tapes, missing frames, and most importantly, technical gaps appearing right at the critical moments. In a way, Megan's return to the program wasn't due to anything new. It was because technology had finally caught up with the desperation of the investigators from years ago. The original tapes from the 3 nearby businesses, the grocery store, the bar, the video store, were transferred to the image analysis lab. The AI technicians described them as looking through smoke, underwater, and with a pair of eyes covered in fog. But this time, instead of just brightening or adjusting contrast like in 1991, they could use deep learning algorithms trained to reconstruct images from extremely heavy noise. The recovery process started with the grocery store camera, the one where Megan appeared most clearly for the last time. The AI algorithm ran through hundreds of thousands of frames on the original tape, rearranging each blurry pixel according to motion patterns, thereby identifying the basic outline of her body. Megan appeared in the frame like the silhouette of a slender person, long hair tied low, walking at a steady pace. This wasn't new, but the new part was what appeared behind her. As the AI recovered and clarified the subsequent frames, a second motion pattern emerged behind Megan at first, just a dark streak on the edge, but gradually stabilizing into a human body shape. Before, police had only seen this silhouette on the bar camera, with its obstructed angle and high noise. But on the grocery store camera, it had never been visible because layers of bright static covered everything. The algorithm separated the noise layers, removed fireworks, light streaks, and de-blurred based on motion models. And for the first time in 3 decades, police saw a figure walking right behind Megan, maintaining a distance of no more than 4 to 5 meters. When Daniel Rourke, now a veteran detective, watched the recovered footage, he almost held his breath. It was no longer a random shape, no longer a dark streak that could be anyone. That figure had a relatively consistent height, shoulders noticeably broader than Megan's, and movement synchronized with her direction. Nothing in the image suggested they knew each other. The distance the person maintained, not too close, not too far, was consistent with how a stalker typically stays to avoid notice. Daniel paused at the segment where Megan stepped out of the light into the alley. There, the AI clarified a detail once considered unrecoverable. As Megan entered the darkness, the person behind her slightly increased speed, closing the gap. Just a few steps, but enough for the camera to capture in motion form. At the frame edge, once just a faint bright streak, the AI reconstructed the shape of the person's right arm, slightly moving, as if preparing to step faster or reach forward. That moment was brief, lasting less than a second, but it completely changed police understanding of that night. Because in the original tape, no one could confirm that person was real or just noise artifact. But now it was different. The algorithm had confirmed the motion signature as that of a real person, not a lighting effect. And furthermore, the motion vector mapping matched exactly someone following, not someone coincidentally walking the same way. When switching to the bar camera, the AI continued clarifying the silhouette once hidden under the awning. The most chilling part was that, for the first time, detectives saw the suspect turn his head to scan around before continuing to follow Megan. Before, police only saw blurry legs moving in weak light, completely insufficient to conclude anything. But the AI, by interpolating missing frames, filled in the image gaps and reconstructed the direction of the head and shoulders movement. This made Daniel clearly sense one thing. The person behind Megan wasn't a normal pedestrian, not a tourist leaving the festival, not a local resident heading home. His movement was purposeful and calculated. Steady stride, head slightly leaned forward, fixed distance maintained. And most importantly, he was still in frame right before the video store camera dropped out for the critical 4 minutes. This aligned with the 1991 hypothesis that the perpetrator approached Megan during the exact time the camera failed, but now, it was no longer just a hypothesis. It started looking like a grounded scenario. Megan steps into the darkness. A person following closes the gap. The camera stops recording right as their shadows overlap. Then all images vanish. When the AI analyzed all 3 cameras to rebuild a visual timeline, Daniel sat in front of the screen in absolute silence. 30 years later, the blurry shadows that once left police helpless had now become a coherent sequence of movement. Megan, walking a figure, following, disappearing into the blind spot, and never appearing again. Daniel wrote in his report, 2021 AI video confirms presence of a follower at close range. This is the first visual evidence showing Megan was tailed before disappearing. Though the face couldn't yet be identified, the identity couldn't yet be determined, the recovered video was still the first time in 3 decades that police had something they never had before. A clear shape of the person who followed Megan Hartley into the darkness of King Street on the night of July 4, 1991. And with that, the darkness of the case began to waver for the first time since the day Megan vanished. The AI video recovery in 2021 didn't just open a new perspective on the movement of the figure following Megan. It also prompted the cold case unit to re-examine the entire physical evidence in the case once more, this time using techniques unimaginable in 1991. When Daniel requested reopening the evidence box, MH9107, he knew the chances of finding anything valuable were extremely slim. Most items had been sealed for 3 decades, and many had even lost processing value due to the technological limitations of that era. But per procedure, all evidence had to be rechecked, and that very process led to a discovery no one on the team ever thought still existed. In the corner of the evidence box was an old, worn small plastic bag, its label almost completely faded, with only a few letters still readable. Trash found near alley. Daniel frowned. The 1991 report had mentioned a torn trash bag with scattered contents near the alley where Megan was last seen, but since nothing stood out, it was collected just as a precaution. What was inside the bag, according to the original notes, was insufficiently relevant for further examination. A few animal hairs, a wet piece of paper, and a brown hair strand stuck to the plastic layer. In 1991 conditions, analyzing DNA from a single hair was nearly impossible. And if the hair lacked a root, it was considered almost useless. So back then, police simply documented it and stored it away. But 2021 was a different era. Daniel opened the evidence bag, using sterile tweezers to lift out the hair strand. It was so thin, it was barely a curving line glinting under the lab lights. He held it as if holding the first real chance to touch the truth in 3 decades. Beside, it was something he hadn't noticed in the file before. A very small piece of fabric, partially torn, its color no longer clear due to years of dust, sealed together with the hair. The 1991 report described it as fabric scrap unclear origin. Daniel pondered. On a chaotic festival night, any trash bag could contain countless meaningless items. But with the AI already showing Megan was followed and vanished just meters from the trash bag's location, Daniel no longer dared consider any evidence random. The hair was sent to a DNA lab specializing in extremely small samples, where even the faintest biological material could be analyzed using mtDNA, mitochondrial DNA, which can be compared to maternal line relatives, even if the sample is degraded. The fabric scrap was sent to the chemical analysis unit to determine composition, original color, and possible close contact with heat, sweat, or contaminants. As the samples were entered into the system, no one in cold case wanted to hope too much. Results from 30-year-old cases usually bring more disappointment than breakthroughs, but this time was different. The first DNA lab report made Daniel read it twice to make sure he wasn't mistaken. Hair sample mitochondrial DNA shows strong consistency with maternal line profile of Megan Hartley. The phrase strong consistency wasn't a 100% match, but in a case with no body and no direct physical evidence for 3 decades, it was stronger than anything the investigation team had ever held. It meant that hair strand was very likely Megan's, or from someone sharing her maternal line. This pointed to the near-certain possibility that the hair didn't end up in the trash bag randomly, but fell during whatever happened as Megan or her pursuer passed the area. Even the location where the bag was found just meters from the alley further reinforced the result's significance. Daniel noted, first physical evidence potentially belonging to victim discovered, but even more surprising was the result from the fabric scrap. The chemical analysis unit reported that the small piece was cotton fabric commonly used in women's loose-fitting shirts from the early 90s. Original color, most likely dark blue or black, but faded over time. The cotton fibers still retained traces of a very small amount of human sweat, enough to know it had once belonged to a worn garment. And what truly silenced Daniel was the final part of the report. Trace elements suggest tearing, not cutting, likely ripped by force. A piece of fabric torn by force, near where Megan vanished, found in a disturbed trash bag that police had once noted. The alignment of these factors made Daniel feel as if someone had just struck hard at the fog enveloping the case for 3 decades. In the internal meeting right after, Daniel presented the results. The younger detectives, new to the job, who hadn't experienced 1991, were stunned, while those who had investigated Megan's case from the start just sat in silence, eyes fixed on the screen, as if looking back at their own images from 30 years ago, the first time they heard the name Megan Hartley. The hair didn't reveal identity. The fabric didn't point to the perpetrator. But for the first time since 1991, physical evidence, something tangible, measurable, analyzable had emerged. And more importantly, it aligned with the AI video. Megan was followed. The person behind her sped up. The camera cut out. She vanished. And just meters away, there was a disturbed trash bag containing a brown hair and a torn fabric scrap. Daniel wrote in his end-of-day summary report, for the first time, video and physical evidence intersect. Possible contact struggle indicated. In a case where darkness had dominated for 30 years, a single hair and a torn piece of fabric were the first 2 streaks of light piercing through the night. And they were only beginning to reveal what no one had seen before, that Megan wasn't just followed. She may have struggled, she may have tried to resist, but the entire city heard no sound from her that night. It wasn't until 2021 that those traces were rediscovered, still lying quietly in a corner of the evidence box, waiting for an era advanced enough to listen to the story they told. When the AI recovered video and the new physical evidence results were confirmed, the cold case unit seemed to come back to life after years sunk in silence. But the biggest change didn't come from the lab or from sophisticated algorithms. It came from a flesh and blood person who had carried a piece of the truth in his heart for 3 decades. One late afternoon in 2021, while Daniel was reviewing the file again to prepare for a strategy meeting, he received a notification that an elderly man had requested a private meeting with the detective in charge of the Megan Hartley case. He said he had something important to say before it was too late. The man was named Earl Donnelly, 78 years old, living 2 blocks from King Street, right near the area where Megan was last seen. Earl walked into the room as if carrying the full weight of 30 years of guilt and fear. His hands trembled slightly, his eyes avoided direct contact, and the first words out of his mouth were, "I should have come here a long time ago." Daniel offered him a seat, poured water, then waited for him to settle. No pressure, no immediate questions. Earl took a deep breath, then uttered the next sentence that made Daniel's whole body freeze. I saw that girl being pulled into a silver car. Not heard a sound, not saw a shadow, not thought I saw something. He stated it with a trembling but clear voice. I saw it. Daniel listened in absolute silence. Earl explained that on the night of July 4th, 1991, after finishing a late dinner with family, he stepped outside to watch the fireworks from a distance. As he passed the stretch near the alley exactly where Megan had turned, he saw two figures in the flickering light of the malfunctioning street lamp. One was a young woman, long hair, slender build, heading toward the alley. The other was walking a few steps behind her, taller, broader. When a big burst of fireworks lit up the sky, he saw more clearly for a moment. The man reached out toward her. Earl said at the time he didn't understand what was happening. But a few seconds later, as both neared a silver sedan parked at an angle, he saw the man grab Megan's arm. She jerked back instinctively. Then he heard a muffled sound, like someone being shoved. The fireworks flashed brightly one more time, and in that light, Earl saw the man pull Megan into the back seat of the car. She resisted, but seemed overpowered. Then the door closed with a sharp metallic slam matching what another witness had once described. Earl raised his hand as if reenacting. The door slammed shut, hard. Then the engine revved. Daniel wrote down every word. This was a statement police in 1991 never had because Earl had said nothing all those years. When Daniel asked why, the man lowered his head, his voice so soft it was almost inaudible. I was threatened. Earl explained that the very next morning, when news of Megan's disappearance spread all over Alexandria, he intended to report to police. But as he left the house to go to the station, he found a note slipped under his door. Don't talk about last night. No signature, no picture, nothing else. Just a neat piece of paper with 5 words in bold black marker capitals. He didn't know who put it there, didn't know how it got there, but he understood the message clearly. Someone had seen him and didn't want him to talk. Earl lived alone. His wife had passed in 1989. His son worked in Florida. He didn't want to confront someone capable of abducting a woman in a crowded street without leaving traces, so he stayed silent. He kept that memory locked inside, buried under layers of worry, fear, and self-blame, until the memory faded with age but the guilt did not. I know I was wrong, he said, voice hoarse, but I was scared. And then time just passed, and I told myself maybe police didn't need me anymore. But I saw it, clearer than anyone. Daniel didn't judge him. Any seasoned detective knows what textbooks don't teach. Fear keeps many witnesses silent for life, especially in cases where the perpetrator is ruthless enough to take someone off the street without a trace. Daniel asked the most important thing. Can you describe the man? Earl closed his eyes, trying to remember. But time had worn away the face from his memory. He could only recall scattered details. He was a head taller than Megan. Broad shoulders, dark jacket moved very confidently, not stumbling like a drunk. Large hands, strong arms, deep low voice, but he couldn't make out the words, all too vague to build a suspect portrait. But one detail was extremely significant. He drove the silver sedan, and Earl clearly remembered the feeling when the car pulled away. It was unusually clean, shiny, new-looking, like it didn't belong to someone from the neighborhood. That detail matched the 1991 reports. A bartender saw a man loitering outside the hotel. A resident saw a silver car parked improperly. Another heard a strong car door slam. A 2001 witness said the silver car returned a second time. Everything scattered, incomplete, until Earl's statement tied them into a coherent story. Daniel knew this wasn't evidence enough to arrest anyone immediately, but it was the most complete account ever of Megan's final moments on the ground. No longer blurry shadows, no longer sounds, no longer hypotheses, but a human being who saw it with his own eyes. Megan pulled into a silver sedan and vanishing that night. But why did Earl decide to tell the truth in 2021? He said something Daniel didn't expect. I was just diagnosed with heart disease. The doctor told me to take care of unfinished business. I don't want to take this secret to my grave. Daniel sat still. Every longtime detective has encountered late confessions, but rarely one carrying the weight of 30 years of torment like this. Earl's statement didn't break the case instantly, but it changed how Cold Case viewed the entire story. From the AI video, from the hair strand, from the torn fabric, from the pre-malfunction camera service, from the blurry plate, all pointing in the same direction. Megan didn't wander off, didn't leave the city voluntarily. She was taken quickly, cleanly, deliberately, and at least one person had witnessed it, but lived 30 years in silence because of an anonymous, threatening note with no name, no face, no voice. Just like Megan was swallowed into the darkness that night, the truth Earl carried had also been swallowed into darkness for 3 decades, until he himself pulled it back into the light, before it was too late. After Earl Donnelly's statement, the picture that had been fragmented for 30 years suddenly gained sharper outlines than ever before. A man pulling Megan into a silver sedan, a car unusually clean, parked at an odd angle, appearing twice in the same night, a figure following Megan in the AI-recovered video. A torn piece of fabric, a brown hair strand, dropped near the alley, and one other detail so small it had once been overlooked, now began to shine like an overlap that could no longer be ignored. The person who had touched the hotel camera just hours before Megan vanished. Thomas Hale. That name returned like a knife cutting through both memory and old files. No one on the 1991 investigation team thought Hale was central. He was just on the list of unverified silver car owners, crowded among dozens of other names. But now, as Daniel placed his name next to Earl's statement, next to the AI data, next to the new physical evidence, the entire case seemed to revolve around him, as if that name had been waiting in the darkness for 3 decades to be illuminated. Daniel immediately pulled Hale's full personal file. He was born in 1963, had worked as a light electrical technician for a small company in Arlington, specializing in security camera repairs for hotels, restaurants, and local businesses. In 1991, he was contracted by the hotel where Megan worked to fix the lobby camera. The repair time was around 1740, according to the old maintenance log Daniel had found. And around 2100, the camera started glitching. By 2200, when Megan left the hotel, it lost signal for several seconds. If this was mere coincidence, it was the kind that made any detective frown. But the file didn't stop there. Daniel found Hale's 1991 vehicle registration, a 1988 silver sedan. Buick Regal make one of the model's witnesses described as unusually clean. Silver color, roof-reflecting lights, dark red taillights. That afternoon, Daniel reviewed Earl's description once more. Silver car, very clean, parked crooked, left quickly. Every word slotted together like gear teeth that had been misaligned for 30 years, now sliding perfectly into place. Then there was one more detail. A detail so minor it seemed meaningless in the 1991 file but became one of the most crucial pieces when placed alongside the new statements and video. Hale had been ticketed by Arlington police for a faulty left brake light just 3 weeks before Megan vanished. And witness Gerald Whitmore, who in the 2001 file reopening described the silver car returning twice, had said, "I remember the rear lights were dimmer on the left, like a bulb about to burn out." In 1991, no one paid attention. But in 2021, Daniel cross-checked the ticket. Date on the citation, June 14, 1991. Over 2 weeks before Megan was taken. Faulty left brake light, silver car, 1988 Buick Regal. Everything matched the witnesses, and this time, not just one witness but 3. The elderly man describing the car parked improperly, Gerald describing the car returning twice, left light dimmer than normal. Earl describing an unusually clean silver car. Picking up Megan in the alley, Daniel felt chills down his spine when he read that Hale, in 1992, had replaced the entire vehicle lighting system, complete invoice included. A normal action. If it hadn't been done right after Megan's disappearance became headline news in Alexandria. The deeper Daniel dug into the file, the more he realized Thomas Hale was the only person appearing simultaneously in 3 data groups. The one who serviced the hotel camera right before it failed. 2. The owner of a silver sedan matching witness descriptions. 3. The person whose location on the night Megan vanished could not be verified in the say 1991 investigation report. Almost all silver car owners had alibis. Only 2 remained unverified. One had left the state. The other was Hale. And because police at the time found no direct reason to suspect him, Hale's file was categorized as insufficient data, a decision Daniel saw as the first crack leading to 30 years of delay. Daniel continued checking Hale's background. He had no serious criminal record, just minor traffic violations, mostly parking tickets and some administrative infractions. But 2 things stood out. Hale moved residences frequently throughout the 90s. His employment history was always short-term and fragmented, only a few months at each job. These weren't enough to conclude anything, but they fit the avoidance pattern many trace-free abductors often display. Daniel found the 1991 interview transcript with Hale. He had been contacted during the silver car owner lockdown phase, but the conversation lasted only minutes. "Were you driving your car on the night of July 4th? "No. I was home." "Anyone to confirm?" "No." With too little reason to hold Hale longer, he was noted as unverified but not suspicious. Back then, there was no AI camera recovery, no DNA evidence, no witness confirming direct action, and most crucially, no one knew he had touched the hotel camera just hours before the incident. All this left Daniel with one heavy thought. Hale didn't appear in the case by coincidence. He sat right at the intersection of every dark point in the file. Faulty camera, blurry plate, silver car, faulty left brake light, frightened witness, video showing a figure following Megan, torn evidence near the alley. Daniel decided to do what the 1991 team hadn't: build a separate timeline for Thomas Hale on July 4th, 1991. When cross-referencing maintenance logs, traffic citations, work schedule, and residence data, he uncovered a chilling detail. Hale had no confirmation of his whereabouts from 1700 to 1 a.m. His time hung on the map like a black void overlapping the entire window when Megan worked her shift, ended it, and disappeared. No camera captured Hale's license plate in the area. But in 1991, street cameras were rare, and business cameras were low quality. This didn't rule out Hale driving through unmonitored roads, especially the smaller streets around King Street. When Daniel presented all these findings in the cold case unit's in-depth meeting, the room fell silent. An older detective who had worked Megan's case in 1991 placed his hand on the table and said in a low voice, "We saw that name before. We just weren't looking from the right angle." In the new file, Daniel wrote, "Thomas Hale emerges as prime suspect based on cross-analysis of tampered camera, vehicle match, maintenance timeline, witness statements, and newly recovered video evidence." For the first time in 30 years, the Megan Hartley case had a name at the center of suspicion, no longer just the echo of a silver sedan in the dark, but a flesh-and-blood man, Thomas Hale. When Thomas Hale's name surfaced with 3 major overlaps: the camera repair, ownership of the 1988 silver sedan, the left brake light ticket, Daniel Rourke began examining everywhere Hale could have gone during the window Megan vanished. Checking his driving history from July 1991 showed an anomaly. The odometer jumped sharply in just 3 days, far beyond his normal commute. When mapped against area roads, that sudden mileage spike pointed south, toward the edge of Fort Belvoir, a military base with thousands of acres of forest and remote, unmonitored land, especially in the 90s. Daniel traced the route. Drivers back then often used Route 1 and small access roads leading into the woods. At this fringe stood areas locals called Belt of Quiet stretches, silent, unlit, with little nighttime traffic. Right here, Daniel suspected Hale may have stopped the night Megan disappeared. He brought the theory to the cold case unit and got approval for a geophysical survey. By now, ground-penetrating radar was powerful enough to detect soil disturbances, even after decades of rain, weather, and erosion. A technical team was sent to the suspected zone, a patch of forest edge over 200 meters from public roads, near an old trail locals used before the 90s but later abandoned. The ground was blanketed in decayed leaves and tree roots. Nothing looked disturbed to the naked eye, but as the radar swept across, electromagnetic waves bounced back on the screen in curves and light dark patches reflecting depth and density. At first everything was normal, flat, even returns showing undisturbed layers. Then on the fourth pass a signal appeared. A region of overturned soil layers, over a meter long, less than half a meter wide, at about 40-60 centimeters deep. Its shape was unmistakable, a patch, dug up and refilled. The soil there was not compacted like the surroundings. Returns broke and curved unnaturally. The technicians exchanged looks. This was a backfilled hole. No one jumped to conclusions, but none denied the possibility. Daniel marked the spot on the map and expanded the scan. Radar found two smaller disturbed patches farther out, but less distinct. The first remained the strongest, and it sat exactly where radar often spikes over soil moved by hand tools. A day later, after getting excavation orders from the military and the prosecutor's office, the team began digging the suspicious spot. Fort Belvoir forest soil was damp, soft, and crumbled easily. The top layer of leaf litter peeled away to reveal dark earth beneath. They worked slowly, using forensic brushes so nothing was damaged. Each layer was lifted and sifted for even the tiniest object, but at the depth radar had flagged, they found no body, no bones, no bone fragments, no ash or organic residue, no personal items, no bracelet, ring, or button. Just soil mixed with roots, natural things. The initial tension eased into quiet disappointment. Then, just as the crew prepared to close the pit, one technician bent down, picked something extremely thin from the dirt, and handed it to Daniel with sterile tweezers. It was a cotton fiber, only millimeters long, faded to indigo gray by time and humus. Tiny as it was, its weave was still analyzable. The evidence was bagged in clear plastic, numbered, and sent to the lab. When the analysis came back, Daniel and the cold case unit realized they were facing something unprecedented in 30 years of investigation. This fabric fragment matched exactly the scrap recovered from the trash bag near where Megan vanished. The report was clear. Both fragments were woven from the same thick cotton. Both showed the same early 90s edging thread. Both were torn in the same direction, ripped, not cleanly cut. Surface microfibers showed high similarity. Daniel reread the original 1991 notes. The alley scrap had been dismissed as irrelevant because the era lacked microtexture comparison tech. Now, placed beside the Belvoir fiber, they looked like two pieces torn from the same garment. Possibly Megan's shirt, something she carried, or fabric ripped during a struggle. The fact that the two fibers appeared at two separate sites, one in the Alexandria alley, one at Fort Belvoir, created a trail never before seen in the case. No body in the ground, but a trace of something linked to Megan had once been there. And that meant someone had brought something tied to Megan to Fort Belvoir, whether to discard, hide, or destroy evidence. The GPR technician explained that the digging signs showed a small tool, hand shovel, or similar. The depth wasn't enough to bury a person, but it perfectly fit burying something like clothing, a bag, or related evidence. Daniel retraced Hale's route. He lived in Arlington, a 20-minute drive from Fort Belvoir. He had contracts repairing equipment for a business near North Post Gate. His car racked up extra miles the week Megan was taken, and he had no alibi from late afternoon to early morning on July 4th. When Daniel laid the Fort Belvoir report beside the 1991 evidence, the lines between the two locations, the Alexandria alley and the remote Belvoir clearing, sharpened to where no explanation was needed. Those two tiny fabric scraps became the only links between where Megan vanished and where the suspect may have stopped afterward. Finding no body didn't diminish the discovery. Instead, it suggested the perpetrator's behavior likely wasn't about burying a person, but about burying evidence. And that evidence, however small as a thread, had survived 30 years under Belvoir forest soil, only to resurface in the artificial light of a lab, making everything once vague, now shaped, directed, and logically clear. For the first time in 3 decades, the cold case unit knew that Megan wasn't just snatched from Alexandria, a trace of her, or of the struggle that night, had once been present in a remote spot miles from the city. After the fabric fiber from Fort Belvoir was confirmed to match the 1991 evidence sample, the cold case unit focused all resources on the only name standing out across every thread: Thomas Hale. But to turn suspicion into a viable charge, they needed something the past 3 decades had never provided: biological evidence directly linking Hale to Megan. This had once been seen as impossible because Hale's car, the place most likely to hold traces, had been sold in the late 90s and changed hands at least 4 times afterward. Vehicle registration records showed the 1988 silver Buick Regal once owned by Hale had vanished from the system since 2005 due to expired records being purged after too long. But early in 2022, while Daniel and the forensics team tried reconstructing the car's journey, unexpected information surfaced. A rural Maryland garage reported a 1988 Buick Regal abandoned on their property since 2014. The landowner had died, and heirs wanted to clear the old garage before selling. Police were called to inspect because the car seemed tied to an undetermined old case. When Daniel heard the old plate read out, he froze. It was the very plate once belonging to Hale, now faded, rusted, and almost peeled clean of paint. The car sat in the dark garage, coated in dust, cobwebs, and rodent droppings. The roof dented from heavy items stacked on it over years. The rear seat rotted, front seats torn, rear window cracked, but to Daniel, it felt like seeing a ghost from 1991 step out of the shadows, worn, decayed, but still carrying secrets 20 years of searching had never touched. The vehicle was wrapped in anti-contamination sheeting and transported to the state forensic lab as historical evidence. Technicians needed days to process layers of dust and decomposed material inside without distorting any remaining biological samples. 2022 technology allowed collection of ultra-trace DNA, extremely faint biological markers, just a few skin cells, protein molecules, or sweat residue on surfaces. In the past, such traces were considered useless, but now they were among the strongest keys to reopening cold cases. The forensics team started with the gear shift, steering wheel, door handles, and seat belts, the spots most likely to retain prints. Then they used ultra-sensitive swabs to scan every flat surface inside, even the dustiest areas. The process took nearly 3 weeks. As samples were processed through next-generation DNA sequencing, many signals were ruled out, mostly from rodents, stray cats, or later owners. But one morning, while Daniel reviewed evidence data, the lab called with barely contained excitement. "We have a suspicious micro-DNA signal. You should come see this right away." Daniel arrived at the lab and stood before the screen displaying results. An extremely weak DNA segment, just scattered mitochondrial fragments, appeared on the graph. It was on the floor mat behind the front passenger seat, a spot rarely noticed during cleaning. What surprised everyone was that the signal didn't belong to any later owners on record. The lab decided to compare the microDNA against the mtDNA profile from Megan's family, collected from her mother when the case reopened in 2001. When the algorithm finished matching, the words on screen made the room go silent. MicroDNA sample, consistent with maternal line DNA of Megan Hartley. This wasn't a perfect match. MicroDNA was too small for full profiling, but the high consistency in mitochondrial segments meant the DNA was very likely from Megan herself or someone sharing her maternal line. It was enough to establish one strong possibility. Megan had been inside Thomas Hale's car, or in contact with an object inside before it was sold. The location of the sample rear floor mat behind the front seat aligned with Earl's statement that Megan was pulled into the back seat of the silver car. Though the trace was too faint to date precisely, the microDNA evidence did what 30 years of forensics couldn't: place Megan inside the suspect's vehicle. When Daniel re-examined the sample spot, he noticed it was wedged between 2 small cracks in the old rubber mat, meaning the DNA likely fell and lodged before the car got new mats or repairs. This increased the chance the sample dated to when Hale still owned the Buick Regal before resale. This microDNA, combined with the Fort Belvoir evidence and AI video, turned suspicion into a logical chain. A man closely following Megan in the AI video. A witness seeing her pulled into a silver car, matching torn fabric appearing in both Alexandria and Fort Belvoir. Now Megan's micro-DNA appearing in Hale's very car, Daniel wrote point. In his report, UltraTrace DNA provides first direct physical link between victim and suspect's vehicle. No detective in the briefing room spoke when the document was projected. Everyone understood that every prior piece, shadowy figure, tampered camera, threatened witness, fabric fibers, dug hole, had only created a silhouette of suspicion. But micro-DNA was something that could stand in court without easy dismissal. From a trace as small as dust, from a DNA signal so faint it nearly vanished, the Megan Hartley case, once thought sunk into permanent silence, gained the breakthrough 3 generations of detectives had relentlessly pursued. The first physical link between Megan and the car of the man every trace over 30 years had quietly pointed toward. After the micro-DNA results emerged, the cold case unit transferred the file to the Alexandria prosecutor, along with all the new physical evidence, the matching fabric fibers from 2 locations, the AI recovered video showing a figure closely following Megan, the direct eyewitness statement from Earl Donnelly, information about the silver sedan, the camera serviced before the night Megan vanished, and especially the maternal line micro-DNA from Megan appearing in the very car once owned by Thomas Hale. It was the first time in 3 decades that investigators had a chain of evidence tight enough to request an arrest warrant. When the file went to court, a federal judge agreed to sign the arrest warrant for Thomas Hale in early 2024. Locating Hale wasn't difficult. He had left Virginia years earlier and lived in an old mobile home on the outskirts of Scranton, Pennsylvania. Tax and utility records showed he lived alone. No family, no friends, no steady employment history for the past 15 years. At noon on March 11, 2024, a joint team from Pennsylvania Police and Alexandria investigators approached the mobile home where Hale resided. The sky was overcast, snow piled on the roof, and the smell of burning wood from neighboring units mixed in the cold air. When the SWAT team knocked, Hale opened the door in an old jacket, long gray beard covering most of his face. He saw the badges, and his eyes suddenly changed, not panicked, but narrowed, wary, like someone who had spent years living uneasily in the shadows. "Are you Thomas Hale?" Daniel asked. Hale didn't answer right away. He glanced quickly behind the team, then back at Daniel. "What's this about?" Daniel presented the arrest warrant. "You're under arrest for charges related to the disappearance of Megan Hartley, Alexandria, 1991. He stood silent for a few seconds, then let out a sentence that sounded long prepared. "I don't know who she is." That was the first in a long string of denials Hale would repeat for hours afterward. He was handcuffed, placed in the vehicle, taken to Scranton substation for initial questioning before extradition to Virginia. In the small interview room with pale gray walls, Hale sat handcuffed at the cold metal table, neon lights reflecting off his dull but always door-checking eyes. Daniel opened the file, laying out photos one by one. The AI recovered video stills from the 1991 footage. Pictures of the silver Buick Regal. Images of the torn fabric evidence. The micro-DNA analysis report. Hale didn't look at any of them. Every time Daniel asked a direct question, "Where were you on the night of July 4th, 1991? Did you service the hotel camera where Megan worked? Did you own this silver Buick?" He replied with vague phrases. "Don't remember clearly. Maybe, it's been a long time. I sold that car." But when Daniel placed the micro-DNA analysis report in front of him, Hale tilted his head, blinked quickly, then turned away. That was when Daniel knew he had hit a weak spot. "DNA doesn't lie," Daniel said calmly. "And the sample in your car matches Megan Hartley's maternal line." Hale took a breath, eyes dropping to the floor. "That car had many users after me. That proves nothing. But the micro-DNA sample was wedged in the rubber mat cracks before the car got new flooring," Daniel replied. "Flooring replaced in 1994. Meaning the DNA was there before then, and only one owner before 1994. Hale pressed his lips together but didn't rebut immediately. He sat silent for a few seconds, then suddenly said, "I didn't take anyone. Certainly not her. The constant and inconsistent denials began painting a clearer picture than any confession could. He shifted his story each time Daniel changed direction, sometimes claiming he didn't know who Megan was, sometimes saying he might have seen some girl on King Street, other times saying he was home that night but doesn't remember clearly, then claiming his car wasn't driven that night, but the left brake light repair records showed otherwise. The investigators, too familiar with this kind of contradictory testimony, kept probing the gaps, but what changed the interrogation wasn't Hale's words, it was the search of his mobile home. While Daniel questioned him, the Pennsylvania forensics team thoroughly searched every drawer and moth-eaten wooden cabinet in Hale's rundown trailer. Possessions were sparse. A few old magazines, light electrical tools, 2 cardboard boxes of papers. But at the bottom of a stuck drawer, they found a brown leather notebook, edges worn as if handled often. When opened, the pages were filled with dense handwriting. Not a personal diary, not work notes, but descriptions of different women. Female, brown hair, approx 25-30, leaves work at 5:20 p.m., lives alone, car usually parked Maple Corner, blonde near convenience store, often walks late at night, restaurant employee second floor night shifts. Some entries had dates at the top, running from the late 80s through 1993. Among them was one that made investigators stop. Brown-haired girl at King Street Hotel. Leaves shift around 10 p.m. Walks alone. No boyfriend pickup. Next to it was the notation, 4/7. No year but 4/7 was the day Megan Hartley vanished. When the notebook was brought into the interview room, Hale looked at it like a knife. People misunderstand these, he muttered, voice almost a whisper. I observe to protect them. It's occupational habit. You repaired cameras, Daniel replied. Not protected people. Hale didn't respond. Daniel continued. You stalked women for at least 5 years, and logged them by times, routes, habits. Why would a camera technician need to know when a woman leaves her shift? Hale looked down at his hands. Dirty nails, calloused knuckles, marks of years working with wiring tools. Daniel flipped to the 4/7 page, pushed the notebook toward him. Brown-haired girl at King Street Hotel. You were stalking Megan before she disappeared. Hale closed his eyes, lips twitching slightly, chest heaving. But what he said was only, I don't remember. No confession, no full denial, just vague denial, the kind from someone who knows everything around him is collapsing. From the AI video, from the evidence, from micro-DNA, from witness statements, from Fort Belvoir radar, from the notebook. Each link like a noose, tightening around the name Thomas Hale. Pennsylvania police completed extradition procedures. He was handcuffed, placed in a federal security vehicle, leaving Scranton amid cold winds sweeping rundown trailers, heading to Virginia where 33 years earlier, Megan Hartley stepped into the darkness and never returned. In the file, it was noted simply, Arrest executed Thomas Hale, apprehended without incident. But those who witnessed the moment all understood. This wasn't an ordinary arrest, but the end of 3 decades of darkness surrounding a man who once blended into the Alexandria crowd in 1991, carrying a silver sedan and a notebook of women he never thought would be found. The Alexandria trial in 2025 became one of the most anticipated proceedings in the city's history, not only because the case had spanned more than 3 decades, but also because it involved prosecuting a suspect without the victim's body, a legal challenge that could only succeed when circumstantial evidence was strong enough to convince the jury beyond reasonable doubt. Courtroom number 3 in the Alexandria Circuit Court was packed, with back rows reserved for Megan Hartley's family, detectives who had pursued the case from 1991 to the present, and many residents who had grown up with the echo of this disappearance. Thomas Hale entered the courtroom looking gaunt after a year in custody at Fairfax County Adult Detention Center. His hair had gone completely white, his eyes still avoiding all gazes, but his walk no longer carried the cold confidence from when he was arrested in Pennsylvania. The court-appointed defense attorney sat beside him, flipping through documents, but Hale barely looked at anyone. The Virginia prosecutor opened the trial with a clear, systematic description of the 3-decade investigation. We will prove that Megan Hartley was abducted on the night of July 4th, 1991. That Thomas Hale was the person who stalked her, forced her into the silver sedan he owned, destroyed evidence, and attempted to conceal his actions for over 30 years. And we will prove it, without a body. The jury showed no emotion, but they were clearly drawn into the chain of evidence the prosecutor presented. A case once thought unsolvable, suddenly taking shape through modern forensics, criminal science, and late but consistent witness testimony. The prosecution's argument revolved around three pillars: the AI video, the Fort Belvoir forest evidence, and the micro-DNA in Hale's car, all described as the three columns holding up the entire structure of proof. First, the prosecutor played the AI-recovered video in court. The grainy 1991 footage had become a clear sequence of movement. Megan's silhouette, stepping into the darkness, the figure behind her closing the gap, then both vanishing right as the camera dropped frames. This wasn't just an image enhancement. It was a reconstruction of the suspect's behavior that couldn't be seen with the technology of that era. The prosecutor emphasized, the man in the video was not coincidentally walking the same way. His movement changing speed, maintaining distance, and accelerating when Megan turned into the alley is characteristic of a stalker. The second part was witness Earl Donnelly. They called him to the stand, where he recounted in a slow, trembling, but clear voice every detail he had held for 30 years. I saw him pull her into the car. She resisted. The door slammed hard. The defense attorney tried to challenge the faded memory over time, but the prosecutor immediately presented supporting evidence. The anonymous threatening note he received the next day, the identification of the unusually clean silver car, and the location matching where the camera last captured Megan's silhouette. The third and heaviest piece of the trial was the forensics. The prosecutor presented the fabric fiber from the 1991 trash bag and the fiber from Fort Belvoir in 2021. The two samples appeared on the large screen. Fiber structure, tear direction, thick woven cotton material, matching microfiber traces. A fiber analysis expert appeared in court and explained, these two samples are almost certainly from the same type of fabric, torn from the same style of clothing. The match is extremely high. Next came the most shocking exhibit, the micro-DNA. A DNA expert presented the process of extracting the ultra-trace sample from Hale's car floor mat, a sample so small it was useless before. When compared to Megan's maternal line, the high-consistency result left the courtroom in dead silence. This sample, the expert said, though extremely small, appeared in a rarely touched spot between two layers of old rubber. It almost certainly dates from when Hale still owned the vehicle. The defense attorney countered that many people used the car after Hale. The prosecutor immediately produced the 1994 flooring replacement invoice, meaning this DNA had to appear before then, and the only owner before 1994 was Thomas Hale. Records also showed Hale had no alibi during the time Megan vanished. He serviced the hotel camera hours before it failed. His left brake light was faulty, just as witnesses described, and especially the notebook stalking women evidence of behavior showing Hale had noticed Megan before the incident. The prosecutor read aloud from the notebook in court. Brown-haired girl at King Street Hotel. Leaves shift, 10 p.m. Walks alone. Then they asked Hale directly, why were you tracking when she left her shift? Hale did not answer. The defense attorney's final efforts centered on the lack of a body, a key foundation in many murder charges, but the prosecutor cited precedent. Virginia had successfully prosecuted multiple no-body homicide cases when circumstantial and forensic evidence combined to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. Science leaves no gaps, the prosecutor said. Look at the logical chain. Megan was stalked, pulled into a silver car, the car owned by Thomas Hale, torn fabric appearing in the alley, and Fort Belvoir, a place Hale frequented, and Megan's micro-DNA trapped in his car before it was sold. This is a multi-layered case of evidence, not speculation. As the prosecutor concluded their presentation, the entire courtroom sank into heavy silence. No single detail alone was conclusive, but each piece from video, witness, evidence, fibers, to micro-DNA tightened into a net Hale could not escape. In the Alexandria courtroom in 2025, for the first time in 34 years, The story of the night Megan Hartley vanished was no longer a vague mystery. It had become a complete criminal case, strong enough to stand without a body thanks to science, the persistence of detectives, and tiny traces once overlooked in the darkness. When the Alexandria trial in 2025 concluded, and Thomas Hale faced the sentence for the person who had imprisoned the truth for 3 decades, the cold case unit prepared a comprehensive operational summary report to analyze the entire 33-year investigative journey. A journey that clearly reflected the limitations of past technology, initial oversights, and the power of modern science. From the very beginning, the Megan Hartley case had been strangled by the circumstances of its occurrence. The chaotic July 4th festival night, hundreds of people flooding the streets, fireworks drowning out sounds, flickering lights causing security cameras to glitch. Megan turned into an existing blind spot, an area with reported streetlight, electrical faults, and the only camera with a chance to clearly capture her movement had been serviced just hours earlier. These factors, combined with the perpetrator's ability to act quickly, left 1991 police with only a fragmented picture. Vague statements, a silver car with no clear plate, and VHS cameras full of bright static. The initial investigative errors didn't stem from negligence, but from the era's limitations. Police didn't view the pre-disappearance camera service as suspicious. They lacked technology to analyze the brown hair strand. No tools existed to recover video, and no means to conduct geophysical surveys in remote areas like Fort Belvoir. They also overly relied on the hypothesis that Megan might have left voluntarily in the first 48 hours, an assessment that delayed many critical investigative paths. When witness Earl Donnelly was threatened and went silent, investigators had no idea that his statement, if recorded at the right time, could have been the turning point. But they couldn't compel him, didn't know he existed, and had no evidence to revisit and persuade him in the early years when the fear was still fresh. Those initial oversights, combined with technological shortages, sent the case into the loop common to every missing person under suspicious circumstances. No body, no cameras, no plate, no biological evidence. The case fell silent like thousands of other missing persons files across America. But the summary report stated clearly, the biggest error wasn't in police effort. The error was that no one knew what to look for, because the technology of that time couldn't show them what had really happened. What changed everything was the evolution of investigative science. First came AI video recovery, which turned a silhouette once dismissed as bright noise into purposeful movement, showing the suspect closely tailing Megan right before the camera dropped frames. Next was next-generation mtDNA analysis, confirming the 1991 brown hair strand had a high likelihood of coming from Megan's maternal line, even without a root. Then textile forensics, the science of fiber analysis, allowed matching the Fort Belvoir 2021 scrap with the 1991 piece, proving an item linked to Megan had been taken to the forest. The biggest breakthrough was ultra-trace DNA, technology sequencing molecules so small the naked eye couldn't see them. From a rotted floor mat in the old Buick, forensics found micro-DNA matching Megan's maternal line, the first evidence placing her inside Hale's vehicle. All these things, once impossible for 1991 detectives, now formed the solid foundation the Alexandria court could rely on for prosecution. When the cold case unit wrote the conclusion in the report, they emphasized that Megan Hartley was not found through luck or a perpetrator's confession, but through time, technology, and human persistence. The case took 33 years, not due to lack of effort, but because society needed 33 years to possess tools good enough to hear again the voice of someone who had vanished. The report also analyzed the shift in investigative philosophy. Instead of focusing on suspects known to the victim as in 90s cases, the 2021 cold case unit expanded to unusual behavior patterns, like servicing a camera before it malfunctioned, sudden mileage spikes, and travel routes matching evidence burial sites. These techniques couldn't be applied in 1991 due to lack of data, but when data was recovered and expanded, they became the most crucial keys. Finally, the report included a handwritten section by Daniel Rourke, like a message not just to other detectives, but to Megan's family and the entire Alexandria community. Cold cases never die. They don't grow cold. They only wait for technology good enough, for a witness brave enough, for a detective to reopen an overlooked detail. Every file may fall silent, but the truth does not. It only hides, waiting to be seen. The Megan Hartley case ended not with finding a body or a full confession, but with the intersection of science and the patience of people unwilling to let a young woman swallowed by the darkness of Alexandria in 1991 remain forever nameless. And that very thing turned this case into the clearest proof of the message the cold case unit engraves deeply. Cold cases never die. The 33-year pursuit of the truth in the Megan Hartley case is not just a story about a solved crime, but also a mirror reflecting very real issues in American society today. The fragility of personal safety, the limitations of the justice system in certain eras, and the essential role of community in protecting one another. When looking at the journey to find Megan, from the camera serviced right before the night she vanished, to witness Earl's 3-decade silence due to a threat, to the torn fabric scrap and micro-DNA samples smaller than a dust particle, still powerful enough to bring justice back, Americans today can draw many lessons more valuable than a dramatic crime story. The first lesson is that the truth never truly disappears, but it needs to be nurtured with persistence. If the Alexandria cold case team hadn't kept reviewing, if Daniel Rourke hadn't carefully read the 1991 camera repair note, or if AI and forensic DNA technology hadn't been developed, Megan might have remained forever on the list of missing under unknown circumstances like thousands of other Americans. This reminds us that every effort in searching, from reporting suspicious behavior to preserving data, has long-term value. The second lesson is that community has vital power, but only when people dare to speak up. Earl Donnelly keeping his secret for 30 years because of a threatening note reflects a very real fear in American society. Many witnesses hesitate to report due to pressure, shame, or fear of retaliation. This shows the need to build a culture that supports whistleblowers, protecting them through law and community spirit so no one has to live with guilt for staying silent. Finally, the case is a reminder that technology may be slow, but justice does not vanish. From AI video to ultra-trace DNA, the United States now possesses tools that allow correcting wrongs, restoring truth, and delivering justice late but firmly. What matters is that we as citizens must support preserving, reviewing, and reopening old cases, because as the familiar saying in American investigative circles goes, cold cases never die, only people give up on them. If you want to continue joining journeys to reclaim justice like the Megan Hartley case after 33 years in the shadows, please hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video, where we continue shining light on cases thought forever buried by time.